Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 15. In this episode, we're chatting with BC sommelier Lesley Brown, who has some great insider tips to share with us. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to Craig Haynes in Ottawa, who emailed me to say, quote, I want to take this opportunity to say that I'm a fan of your podcast. I like to listen to you and your guests share stories and insights about the world of wine while I commute to work. End quote. I am so glad that I can make your commute seem shorter, Craig. In addition to this podcast, you can also listen to the audio version of my first book, Red, White, and Drunk All Over, available on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. I'm going to continue to give a shout out to those of you who are kind enough to post a review on Apple Podcasts, social media, or email. So if you want me to mention your website or social media handle, please include that in your review along with your name. Now, back to this episode. We're chatting with Lesley Brown from Vancouver, who has some great advice on how to choose a terrific wine from a restaurant list and which questions to ask the sommelier. Plus, she has some amusing stories from her travels to wine regions in Australia, Portugal, and Tuscany. You're really going to enjoy this. Our guest has been an active member of the Canadian wine industry for 17 years, working with several high-profile wine agencies. She holds an International Sommelier Diploma and has taught wine courses to hundreds of students. She's also the new BC president of the Canadian Association of Professional Sommeliers, that's CAPS, and she joins me live from Vancouver.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks for having me.
So, Lesley, you said you have a particular story about Zinfandel while traveling in Australia. Maybe you can share that with us.
Yeah, many different stories throughout my career, and all of them lead to the end result, which is don't take yourself too seriously. This particular moment was one of my highlights where I visited one of the top producers in Australia, but had traveled about 22 hours to get there, and my brain was not really 100% clued in. And the winemaker was explaining how innovative they were, and they had planted Zinfandel grape. And just out of the blue, I don't even know where the comment came from, but I said, did you plant a white or a red Zinfandel grape? For people who may not know, all Zinfandel comes from the same grape. So I did not start off looking very smart in that exact moment.
Very humble of you to share that with us.
I have many, and that goes to show you just don't take yourself too seriously. It's how you learn and grow in the wine industry.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. And then you had another story about being in the Douro in Portugal, the famous wine region of the Douro. Let's just get out all the embarrassment at the top here.
Okay. This one always comes to the top of my 5 most embarrassing stories. And I was with a colleague, and we were fortunate enough to visit Graham's courthouse at the time. And the owner himself, Rupert Symington, was showing us around. And we had stepped into the old lagares where they hand stomped the grapes back in the day in order to extract the color and make an optimum part. And in these cement lagares, which are big troughs, they had these windows. So my colleague and I thought it would be really fun to take photos of each other through these little holes in the wall, until Rupert Symington informed us that's where the men would pee during their breaks on the foot stomping. So that quickly ended our giggling and fun, and we took things a little more seriously.
I guess they were well framed, those photos.
2 embarrassing stories right off the bat.
Excellent. You are one of us, Lesley. Can you maybe take us to the best moment of your wine career to date? I'm sure there's many to come yet, but what's been your favorite moment or best moment so far?
I've had many. It's hard to narrow down some of these moments, but I think the best moment was the first time after studying so much throughout books and tasting wine, having the opportunity to travel overseas. There's been a few different wine regions, but every time it's the same thing where you step foot and you can touch the soil and taste the wines and have the local food and meet the winemakers and the wine principles of these properties that you study so much, and everything comes to life and you realize it all makes sense. I don't know if that sums it up, but everything makes sense. And I feel so lucky every time I get to do that, no matter how many times I've visited, every time it's the same thing. And I realize this is why I love it and this is why I do it.
Ah, beautifully put. I have to agree with you. I think once you have the exterior geography, it becomes part of your internal geography. Like a Burgundy can become so confusing, but if you've been to Meursault and Beaune and so on, you've walked there, you've smelled the wines there, I think you can internalize it much better than just looking at wine labels and just tasting, even though that's important as well. So
Absolutely. And to add on to it, also meeting some of the top wine people in the world who are maybe five, six generations into the wine industry. And you realize they're the most passionate, humble people that you can meet in our whole industry. They command so much respect, and there's a reason why they do what they do as well.
as I say, when it comes to wine, it's often generational and it's farming. I tend to call it fancied up farming, but it does have roots going back generation after generation, and people do take pride. I suppose that goes with any family business, but there's something special about, I think, a farming business and stretching back on the generations. So, what country or area is your favorite place to visit for wine?
I have to say, I don't like to narrow it down or pick favorites, but it's 100% Italy for me. The food, the wines, the regions, I definitely have my heart from the north to the southern part of Italy.
Is there a particular part of Italy or a memory you have of visiting Italy? Maybe it was a sumptuous dinner or something that stood out in Italy itself?
There's been so many, and it's so many regions. And I also love the food of the regions, which I think is why I'm so passionate about Italy. But I probably have a favorite wine and food story from every region. The first time I visited was actually in Tuscany. It was quite a long time ago in 2003, and I had the opportunity to go visit the Antinori family, which is 26 generations into the wine
Wow.
industry, and just to stay in an old castle. And I had the local food of the region and had the opportunity to try their super Tuscans for the first time.
Mm.
And the pairings were just magic for me. There
What
was some braised rabbit at the time, the pastas that were homemade. And the funny thing about it is every time I've been to Italy, you get served the antipasto to start and you enjoy it, and the fresh olive oil over the prosciutto and some of the other antipasto, and my mouth is watering just thinking.
yes, mine too. Good job,
And it's
good job.
supper time there. I'm not here. And the fresh bread and the olive oil and the wines that you have. And then you go into the pasta courses and you think, oh, I'm in heaven. I can just keep eating this. And then the meat course is served. And that's when you
It's
think,
true.
okay, how can I continue on? But as the meal progresses and the wines progress and the time goes on, you realize it's also about the sharing and the time. It's not just sitting down and eating quickly and leaving. The meals take hours, and there's lots of great conversation and learning and sharing stories and tasting wines at the same time, as well as the local cuisine.
You know, you're reminding me of my first trip as well to Italy, which was Tuscany, and it was before I even started writing about wine. But we went and we had this multi-course, only we didn't realize. So they came with the antipasti, so we had that. And then we had the lasagna. It was so good that we asked for seconds, not realizing
Yeah.
that there were so many more courses to come and didn't want to offend anybody by not
Yeah.
trying the rest of them. But it was like we filled up on lasagna and it was like, oh, yeah, just six more courses. Oy.
Yeah.
But
That's the hard thing. It's a marathon sometimes.
it is, but it's what we do. It's our professional
Yes.
duty, yes. And just for those who may not be aware, what are super Tuscan wines?
So Super Tuscan wines, I don't have the exact dates in my head, but I believe it was the late 70s. I'll have to look that up because I don't want to give any misinformation. And the wine laws in Italy are so strict, and everything is determined by the regulated regions of what grapes can come, how many, what's grown there. And a couple producers decided, you know what? I'm going to produce a wine with some international grapes that, of course, were not within the wine laws. And they produced a wine with some Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. They produced some grapes that were not in the regulated region. And of course, because of this, they had to call it like an IGT at the time, which was, I'm not going to pronounce Italian right now, but basically wines of the country. So they can come from anywhere within Italy. They had to declassify from the top level down to that level. And of course, the media grabbed onto it and it took off. And these wines that were supposed to be something innovative and exciting became some of the most popular wines today of Italy. And some of those examples might be a Sassicaia, Solaya, Tignanello, just to name a couple of them, Ornellaia. The Oz, I call them.
Yes, and they give you pause, because they're also some of the most expensive wines.
At the start, they were not. They were maybe a third of the price they are today because people didn't know what the response was going to be on those wines. But there are also some from some of the top vineyard sites in Bulgari on the coast of Tuscany.
They just wanted the freedom to do what they thought was best for the bottle. And Sassicaia, I think, has its own appellation, which was pivotal as well. So back to our topic, we took a little side tour to Italy, which was fun. There was something else that you had mentioned to me. On one of the first nights after becoming a wine steward, the lead sommelier had you serve a table and you didn't know who you were serving. Maybe you can tell us about that.
This isn't as embarrassing as my first two, but I had just started my studies. I had not completed my sommelier diploma at the time, but was very enthusiastic and studying hard. The lead sommelier of the restaurant came up and said, Lesley, you've got to go serve this table, and they're VIPs. And so I went over and served the table, and they ordered wines that required decanting, things I was just learning about. So I put every effort I could into the table, but had no idea who they were at the end. And I'll give the great reveal of who they were. It was the Baron and Baroness Rothschild at the time. And they were visiting. It was in Victoria, BC, actually. And that always stands out to me because it was the pinnacle moment in my wine career.
What did they order? Their own wine or?
I don't remember. It was so long ago, but I do remember it was a big red that required decantation for aeration, not for sediment. So it wasn't an old wine. But as you're just learning, it can be nerve-wracking to make sure you have the optimal temperature and the right glassware and everything else ready to go. And that when you're opening a cork, no matter who the table is, you want to make sure that you're doing a proper job of it. And everything was flawless at that table. That was the nice thing.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It doesn't always happen.
Just like the technology. But yes, you're already sort of getting into the role of the sommelier. I'm tempted to go in multiple directions, but let's talk about CAPS, the Canadian Association of Professional Sommeliers. What does CAPS do? Does it grant certification? Are there sort of multiple levels of courses you take and then you graduate as a certified sommelier?
CAPS is a national association. I actually work with them on the national level as well. It originated in Quebec and Ontario and has quite a large membership in both those provinces. Then the Maritimes came on board. So there's a very large supportive community of CAPS in Halifax, in Prince Edward Island. After that was Manitoba. And then BC came on 4 years ago. There's a couple things that CAPS is involved with. One is that it is an association. And for many years, as I was studying and completed my studies, all I wanted to have was an association that you could interact with other people, a networking association, and encompasses all educational aspects. And that's essentially what CAPS is on the trade level. There is also a very large membership, as you probably know, Natalie, with Ontario, of consumers and people who are just interested in wine and want to attend different events. And CAPS is very strong in Quebec and Ontario from that perspective. We do have an educational component. So there are different levels of courses being offered in different provinces from across Canada. And that would be an entry level starting into your wine career for people who just want to learn more about wine, for people who work in our industry. And that is a basic level one, all the way up to the diploma level of CAPS, which is about a 1-year intensive study program. We are just in British Columbia going to be launching the courses for the first time in fall of 2018. So we don't have them yet, but that is one of the biggest umbrellas of CAPS is the courses. And we're only 4 years in now into British Columbia. So it's taken a little while for us to get up and running. And then one of the other areas that's very important for us is our competitions. We run different provincial competitions. In most provinces, I believe it's every 2 years. But in British Columbia, we run a provincial cap sommelier competition every single year due to our partnership with the Vancouver International Wine Festival. So I know, Natalie, you've attended the wine festival in the past. So the festival announces the Somm of the Year, and that's a partnership with CAP. So we're much busier here running our provincial competitions. Then the winners of those provincial competitions will go compete on the national level and become the best sommelier of Canada. That competition takes place in a different province every 3 years. And in fact, last fall was here in Vancouver, and Carl Villeneuve from Quebec took those honors. The most exciting thing, I think, on the competition front is for the first time in history, Canada is about to host the Americas competition. The Americas competition is always held in one of the Americas, and 24 of the world's top sommeliers will be coming to Montreal this May to compete. And it's the first time I mentioned ever in Canada, so we're very excited about that. We do have 2 Canadians that will be participating in this competition. And if anyone can get to Montreal, or if you're in Montreal and you have the opportunity to attend, seeing the live portion of a competition and you're interested in wine, it's unbelievable.
They're
Yes.
serving judges and being judged on all their criteria, like if they're presenting the bottle correctly and pouring and decanting and all that.
Yes, 100%. And I don't know if anyone's had the opportunity to see on Netflix now the movie Somm, or when it, just watching that one movie gives me chills every time as I watch those competitors blind tasting live. And that's all done live at this competition. And you're seeing the best of the world, which is unbelievable.
That's great. And I think as a consumer, even if you don't want to become a sommelier, it's educational. And you're saying that, but you see what the pros do and what you can expect if you want good wine service in a restaurant. I know not every restaurant has a designated sommelier, but for restaurants that care about the wine list, often there's someone there, the person who bought the wines or the bartender, somebody is knowledgeable enough to talk to you about the wines and what you can expect, especially if you're buying a relatively pricey wine. Actually, speaking of that, not that your wine is expensive, but you need to tell me what's in your glass tonight, Lesley, please.
Right. So tonight I'm having the Dry Creek Heritage Vine Zinfandel. This is in honor of the California Wine Fairs being held in Vancouver tomorrow. So I thought, oh, let's try something from California. I'm now inspired from all our conversation. All I think about in the day is, what am I going to make for dinner? So now I'm curious to see what you have in your glass.
Well, in honor of you, Lesley, I chose a BC wine tonight. It is Cedar Creek Platinum Riesling, and I'm a big fan of Cedar Creek. I wish we got more BC wines here. I really do. And that, of course, is a interprovincial trade barrier issue, which is a whole topic in and of itself. But I am such a huge fan of BC wines. I mean, there's just so many stellar wineries, and I know someday we'll get more of them.
Well, there's so many fantastic BC wines now, and I find it hard to keep up with all the producers opening and with different vintages. But if you have not visited the Okanagan Valley, I highly, highly recommend it. It's phenomenal.
So, Lesley, what would be the best question you think you could ask a sommelier? You might have several, but what would you kick off with if you're in a restaurant, you know the person is knowledgeable about wine, whether they're designated a sommelier or not, but what would you ask as a starting point to get a good wine from their list?
I think you touched on it earlier, Natalie, which is they're the experts of their program. So they have put a lot of work, whether it is a sommelier or wine director, into writing that wine list and finding wines that suit their style of restaurant, the food, and all different levels. So I think the first thing I would start with is being very, very straight up and saying, what's your recommendation? Never hesitate to say, this is my budget, this is what I'm eating, and I'd really love your recommendation. And I think that's something people don't do enough of. Maybe there's an intimidation factor. People feel they should be spending more money, or if they're not buying the most expensive bottle on the list, they're afraid to ask for that. But I think the most important thing is to say, what's your favorite wine and what would you recommend with this food? And this is my budget, and never hesitate to have that conversation.
Absolutely. You hit it right on the head because good restaurants also will often have wines you haven't seen in the liquor store. So, yes, they're the expert on their list. And to get them started, what are you excited about? What do you recommend? You're in for a new taste experience at a restaurant. So, put yourselves into the hands of the sommelier. I think that's the best way to go. It's great advice. So, is there a winemaker you admire most in the world? And why do you admire him or her?
There's so many winemakers that I've had the opportunity to meet and work with, and so many that I admire. But there's one person in the industry that I actually really admire, look up to, and that is Laura Catena. She is an inspiration to me on many different levels. She's the third generation of the Catena winery in Argentina. She runs the winery now, overseeing everything to do with the winemaking, although they have a chief winemaker, the winery itself. She lives in San Francisco, has 3 kids, and is also a full-time medical doctor.
She's an
And
emergency room doctor. Doesn't that make you feel
yes,
very slothful? Yes, I'm running the winery. I have 3 kids and I'm emergency room. Actually, Lesley, she was a guest here probably 2 or 3 months ago. So she is a
okay.
wonderful woman and she knows how to do tango dancing like professionally.
I know.
It
And
just
she
goes on and
sings
on.
in 5 languages. And as a female in the industry, number one, I find her an inspiration that she
Mhm.
can lead and manage so many different things. And secondly, I have seen her sing in tango and she's incredible, but also her drive, her passion for what she does, her dedication towards her family and this industry is very inspiring to me on many levels.
And if there was one person, living or dead, that you could share a bottle of wine with, who would that be?
There's so many as well, and not narrowing it down to one person, but I'd love the opportunity to meet the pioneers of the wine industry, to go back in time and meet Lily Bollinger and sit and see the monks in action and when they built the wine regions of Burgundy or the subregions of Burgundy. And I'd love to meet anyone historical in the wine industry who's been an influence. If there was one person, that would be hard for me to narrow it down because I love to learn from so many different people. So
Absolutely.
it's not a perfect answer to that
No, no, it's
question.
great. You could have a dinner party with monks and Louise Pommery and other people scattered
Yes.
around the dinner table. Be a good discussion.
Is there somebody you would have specifically?
Wow, way to turn the tables. Let's see. I would go with Thomas Jefferson because he was a
Okay.
Renaissance man. Of course, one of
Yeah.
the founding fathers of the United States. Perhaps I should choose someone Canadian, but we don't have a heritage that far back of making wine, or at least commercially.
Mhm.
He was always innovating and he was experimenting with grape plantings from Bordeaux. And I have never thought about that, but I would love to sit down and have some Bordeaux with him. Not the Virginia Monticello stuff. Thank you. That needs time. And maybe today that would be good stuff. But what he brought over from Bordeaux, we would share that and have a good chat.
Okay, well, maybe we should just have a dinner party and then invite all our guests
Yeah,
and then
Jefferson, the monks, Louise Pomeroy. It's going to be a good dinner party. Let's get back to some of these other questions I've been dying to ask you, Lesley. I'll throw one out here. The weirdest or most unusual food and wine pairing that you've had ever?
I'm sure I've had weird wine pairings just through trial and error over the years, but one of the most interesting pairings I've ever had, I attended a dinner many moons ago now, and it was a 7-course dinner, all Rieslings from the same producer and same village, but different Pradicat levels.
Is that
And that
sweetness levels, Pradicat?
yeah, the different
Okay.
sweetness, it's measured by the weight of the sugar levels at harvest. If you've seen those wines before, it goes from Cabinet to Spätlese to Auslese. And it was very interesting because you think I'm going to have a Riesling, I'm going to pair it with A, B, and C, but it was paired with the meats of the course, the desserts of the course. And that's when you realize how powerful some white wines can be as well. And especially Riesling being one of the most diverse and powerful. But
Absolutely.
that's probably one of the most interesting experiences that stand out
Yeah,
because you think, where's the red to go with this main course? And
right.
it was another Riesling that came out with venison. I specifically remember the pairing.
Wow, you're triggering memories for me when I was with Prudart. I think it was Prudart. The caramelized meats had this touch of sweetness, and it went so well with like the Spätlese, a Riesling that had a bit more sweetness on it. It was absolutely lovely. So I know you have a favorite wine gadget that you have handy. I've bought one and not used it yet. So maybe you can tell us what it is
Yes.
and maybe give us a little demo.
Sure. So we were talking earlier. I was mentioning I had the Korvan system here with me tonight, just in case I wanted to dabble in a couple more bottles. And I do have a couple more bottles here. I wasn't specifically sticking to California, but didn't want to open so many bottles. So the Korvan system, a lot of restaurants use it, and it's a wine preservation system that you can pour a glass of wine through the cork. It has a needle, and you're not opening the bottle of wine. So it'll last longer. If you, for example, collect different wines and want to taste them as they develop, you can use the Korvan. I would look up exactly how long the bottle lasts after that fact, but I do know several people, for example, who leave wines in their cellar and go in and taste at different stages and say, okay, this wine is tasting beautifully now. Let's open it and let's get ready to drink it. So I think for at least 7 months after. But with the wine industry and with any other industry, information is always changing. So,
Absolutely.
but I'm,
So you're saying once you puncture the cork with the needle of the Coravan, it's good for another 7 months?
I think it's 7 months. You may
Okay.
want to double check it.
Sure.
And it depends how the wine is kept and everything else. But you are imparting a little bit of gas into the wine when you're doing it. So
Okay.
the wine is not untouched. You are putting a little bit of the gas in.
Okay.
Basically, you can use this on white or red. They have a new system coming out for sparkling wine, so don't use it on sparkling wines. It's a contraption, it's got the needle, the little canister of gas is in the bottom, and it's very, very user friendly. You don't even have to take the capsule of the bottle off unless it's a preference. And you push the needle right into the bottle. And then all you do, you impart a little bit of the gas, and the
Okay.
wine comes out.
Oh, wow.
And you only want to push it once for different pours.
Okay.
But I do know many restaurants are using the system now so that they can pour some very premium wines by the glass.
The cork
They
is still
can,
in there, and because the
yeah,
cork is a bit spongy, it sort of closes in on the hole you created with the needle, if I understand it.
exactly. And so if you're a restaurateur or you're at home and you have a bottle of wine that you don't want to open because you know in 2 days the wine will start to oxidize, this system is very good for that reason. In our world, in the importer world, we use it for samples too.
Right.
It can be used for top end samples so that we're not constantly opening full bottles.
Yeah.
Restaurants use it to pour those premium wines by the glass so they can keep the bottle for several weeks or months and they know that it's not going to spoil if they're opening a really expensive bottle. The entry level systems, I think, are about $250
Okay.
and they can go up from there. So they're not
Right.
inexpensive.
No.
But if you think about what you want to use it for,
Yeah.
or you might be somebody that likes gadgets online, and
Yeah.
this is the newest technology. And you also might just look at the cost of how much wine is actually spoiled. Although
Right.
that doesn't really happen in our world, but in
No.
my world.
No wine
But
left behind.
yeah, exactly. So you have to try yours, Natalie,
I
and
will. I will. I
that.
have to get on it. Lesley, this just went like that. Brilliant. So as we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to share and or where can we find you online?
I don't know. There's so many things to always talk about with wine,
Yes.
right?
We'll have to have a
I
part
feel like,
2.
yeah, I feel like we're actually face to face having a drink of wine together, which
Isn't
is
it
so
great?
nice.
Oh, that's lovely.
You can find me. I'm on Instagram at Lesley Brown 4. You can find me through the Canadian Association of Professional Sommelier website for British Columbia. I think my email address and all my information is on there as well.
Awesome.
And never forget LinkedIn.
That's right. All right. Well, Lesley, thank you so much for joining us tonight. That was a fabulous discussion. Lots of great practical tips and advice, whether we're just consumers enjoying a great bottle in a restaurant or for those who have leanings toward getting into the industry or thinking about becoming a sommelier. Thank you so much for all of this great information.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Natalie. And anytime you want to chat, just give me a call.
Absolutely. I
Face to
will.
face sometime soon.
Absolutely. That would be great. All right, Lesley, I will say goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Cheers.
I just love Lesley's sense of humor. Here are my takeaways from this discussion. Number 1, even when you're knowledgeable about a certain subject, as Lesley is with wine, it's important to stay humble. I think that's the key to learning, no matter how advanced you are. Keep a beginner's mind that is open to new learning and still thrills to the wonders of your subject. Number 2, I love her direct approach to the sommelier or server when it comes to restaurant lists. Just ask for a recommendation and don't be afraid to say what your price range is. And I'd throw in that second question here. Ask the somm what excites him or her on the list. The sommeliers have built that list. They've purchased the wines. They're trying to offer you something that's different from what you'd find in the liquor store. So ask away. They don't expect you to know these wines. Number 3, Lesley gave a great demo on how to use the Korvan wine preservation system. You can actually watch her do this on the video that we recorded. You'll find a link to that as well as to the wines we discussed in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/15. And just a side note, this original conversation did take place on Facebook Live video as well as streaming to YouTube and Twitter. And I've been taking the best conversations and editing them here for this podcast. So this conversation was about a year ago. She mentions the sommelier competition coming up in Montreal. That's already passed, but you can catch the next sommelier competition if you visit the Canadian Association of Professional Sommeliers website. So, what was your favorite tip or quote from this episode? Please share that with me on Twitter or Facebook and tag me at Natalie McLean. On Instagram, I'm at Natalie McLean Wine, or use the hashtag UnreservedWineTalk. You'll also find links to Lesley's social media channels, the Somm documentaries, and bonus tips for this episode at nataliemclean.com/15. My next guest on the show will be Canadian rockstar winemaker Thomas Batchelder, who produces top-notch organic wines in Niagara, Oregon, and Burgundy. He's a former journalist with a great mind and a real talent for telling stories. Finally, if you want to take your ability to pair wine and food to the next level, join me in a free online video class at nataliemclean.com/class. If you like this episode, you can easily share it with a friend, and I really appreciate if you would. Just tap on the purple box that says Unreserved Wine Talk, and in the bottom right corner of your phone, you'll see 3 dots. Click on them, and there's your option to share this. It'll fill in everything for you, including the title of this episode, a link to it, and you can send it via email or text to your wine-loving friend. Thank you, and thank you for taking time to listen to this episode. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.